Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the fic entitled Always Chasing After Something. Here's the summary. While his class is on internships, Aizawa seeks out an underground informant to get information about the League of Villains. After a disappointing conversation, Aizawa finds the informant badly injured and takes him for medical help. And finds out how young this guy really is. And that there's another kid, with no parents in sight. Look, they're underage. He has to get involved now. This fic is 29 chapters long, with just over 200,000 words. Here's Chapter 1. The bar was subdued when Shota arrived that night. It wasn't usually a hopping place. The clientele here was quiet, looking for information more than a good time. Hushed conversations happened in the dark corners, beneath the undertones of pool games and classic radio. It was the kind of place you went to for discretion, the kind of place limelight heroes had no idea existed, and even amongst the underground it wasn't well known. It was an invitation-only bar. And if he was going to get any information about the League of Villains, it would be here. He wandered over to the bar and ordered a beer. Everyone had to buy something. It was part of the rules. The bartender, a man with an octopus mutation quirk that gave him 2 extra flexible arms, grunted a greeting and pulled out a fresh bottle. He ran a tight bar. Fighting was prohibited, and the bar was considered a safe space for all patrons. Heroes couldn't capture villains or follow them out of here. Even if Shigaraki himself walked in, Shota wouldn't be able to do anything. Anyone found violating the policy was banned from returning, and usually had to fight every other patron just to get away. Accepting his beer, Shota circled the bar, looking for potential contacts. There was one in particular he'd been trying to catch for 2 weeks now, but he was hit or miss on when he stopped by. His persistence had finally paid off, though. He stood up from one of the booths in the back, sliding an envelope inside his jacket. "Ghost," he greeted. Sharp green eyes cut across to him, the only part of his face anyone ever saw. Ghost always wore a hood and a face mask, his long coat reaching his knees. Combat boots holstered knives, and more harnesses crisscrossed his body, concealing more weapons. He'd never seen him fight, but he'd seen Ghost throw knives at a dartboard with unbelievable accuracy, and his reputation preceded him. Ghost could get any target from anywhere, no matter the security, and get out again without being seen. He was one of the best underground info brokers and didn't take shit from anyone. Shota wouldn't necessarily call him a vigilante, but he wasn't a villain either. "Eraserhead," he greeted. "Got a minute?" he asked. "I've always got time for you. Have a seat." His previous client walked away with a file of papers, giving Shota a nod as he walked out of earshot. He and Ghost slid into the booth. "I'll skip the pleasantries," Shota warned. "You always do. What do you need?" "Information on the League of Villains," he said, pitching his voice low. Just because this was a sanctuary didn't mean what happened here stayed here. He had to be careful in case anyone was watching. "What kind of information?" Ghost asked. "How many members, their quirks, where to find them, anything." He sounded desperate, and he knew that, but he kind of was. This league attacked a class of first-year students. They couldn't be allowed to gain a following. Ghost traced idle patterns in the wood tabletop. "They're recruiting. I can tell you that much right now. Interested parties go to Giron to set up meetings." Another info broker, this one solidly aligned with villains. Shota didn't dare go to him. Any information Giron gave him couldn't be trusted, and there was a good likelihood he'd never walk back out to share what he'd learned. "I'll tell you one more thing for free," Ghost said, leaning across the table. Shota mirrored his position so he'd be able to hear. "Shigaraki isn't in charge. He's a puppet. The real leader is unstoppable." "I don't believe that." "All Might knocked off half of his head and it didn't stop him. There is no way to beat him." "We'll find a way," Shota vowed. "Who is the real leader?" "He's a nightmare in human clothes," Ghost said. Embellishments weren't usually his style. He was used to getting straight facts from him. Not this cryptic BS. A name, Ghost. I need a name. Don't say I didn't warn you. He's called All for one. Ask All Might about him. All Might, he repeated. He stood up. That's all I know. I've got another job tonight. Catch you later. That was hardly anything. He'd been expecting a lot more from him. Wait, what about the Nomu? Do you know anything about them? He froze beside the table, eyes staring at something that wasn't there. When they refocused, they glared at him. We're done here. He absolutely knew something. What kind of payment do you want for the Nomu info? He asked. I said we're done, he repeated, shoving his hands in his coat pockets and walking away. Shota frowned after him. There'd never been a subject he wasn't willing to investigate before. Even the more unpleasant cases could be made appealing with the right price. So why was this one an exception? He had to find out. Slipping out of the booth, he followed him out of the bar and onto the street. Then, between one blink and another, he was gone. There were no side streets, no dumpsters to hide behind, nothing. It was an open road, and he'd vanished. Shota used his quirk in case he'd gone invisible or something, but Ghost didn't reappear. Swearing, he gave up and went back inside the bar. That was a lead he could follow up on later. For now, he'd see what else he could find out from other patrons. The League was becoming a problem for Izuku. He'd been content to leave them alone ever since he learned who the League was, and had been hoping to stay off their radar so they wouldn't look for him. He wanted nothing to do with them. Eraserhead wasn't the first to ask him for info on the League, only the latest, and so far, everyone had been disappointed with the minimal amount of info he had, and his refusal to find out more. He hadn't even charged them anything, so he didn't know what they were complaining about. Hopefully, the payout from this next job would be enough for him and his new ward to get out of the country. Shit was going to hit the fan in Japan, and he didn't want to be here for it. Using his quirk to conceal his presence, he picked the lock on an office building door and made his way inside. He hid out of sight of the cameras every time he had to reposition his quirk, and made his way up to the top floor, to the office of one Mr. Monty Soma, a casino businessman by day, and a pedophile by night. Izuku's client's son had been one of his victims, and wanted the photos Soma kept in his office. When it came to a kid's safety, Izuku had no qualms ruining a man. He wouldn't even blink. Kids should be protected. They should grow up happy and naive to the world. Stuff like this made him sick, and if his client had asked for Soma's head on a pike, he would have done it. It was the least of what bastards like him deserved. He entered his office, scanning the room quickly for possible traps and anything noteworthy. Other than a tacky sense of style, it was a regular office. The safe wasn't even hidden. It was in the corner of the room with a stuffed duck on top like a table. It was a regular combination safe, and it took one look under the stuffed duck to find the combo written down. A few quick spins of the lock, a solid thunk on the tumblers moving aside, and he pulled open the door. There they were, photo albums of evidence. He took the first one out, feeling slight resistance. He only noticed the string it was attached to when it pulled the pin out of a canister. Green gas hissed out into his face. Fuck! He stumbled back, throwing a hand over his mouth. His eyes burned, and even his mask felt raw around the edges and soaked through with it. It smelled like rotten soy sauce, and he gagged. Should he risk taking his mask off? It was clearly contaminated, but the gas lingered in the air. Was he better with it on? He coughed wet and strangled. Something was coming up his throat. He clawed the mask off and coughed up blood. So, the gas was extremely toxic. Swell. It continued to fill up the room, swirling around his head like some kind of vengeful cloud. He'd get the album another day. He needed to get out and find fresh air. The trek back out through the building wasn't as careful and stealthy as the trek in. He was growing dizzy and lightheaded, which made it hard to walk in a straight line. And every time he used the wall to support himself, he left bloody handprints behind. He hadn't had a job go this south since he first started out a few years ago. It was a blow to his pride he hadn't expected, especially from some mundane pedophile. Somehow, he managed to stumble out of the building. The coughing was growing worse. He could barely breathe. Not good, not good, not good. What did he do? Where could he go? The road wouldn't hold still, which almost certainly meant he'd pass out soon. He was too far from his apartment to make it there, and what would he do once he did? The bar? That was closer. Could he make it? Could he trust anyone there if he did? Did he have any other options? It was the best he could come up with when his vision was starting to tunnel. One step at a time, he would make it to the bar. Shota had spent a few hours at the bar, poking around where he could, but ultimately didn't learn much more than what Ghost had told him at the start. He left disappointed, feeling like he'd wasted his time. He could have been out patrolling instead of making useless chit-chat with people. The night had settled into something dark and unsettling. He couldn't quite put his finger on what was off, but he wrapped a hand in his scarf just in case. A stray cat darted across the road, like it had been spooked. Coming up on an alley it ran from, he peeked inside. Someone had collapsed along the wall. Swearing, he darted over to them. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. He pulled out a flashlight. A long black coat hid most of their body, with knife hilts sticking out of their combat boots. No way. Ghost. He scooted around his other side to look at his face. The mask was pulled down around his chin, and blood trails led from his mouth and nose to soak into the fabric. Even his eyes were red and puffy. Shit, what the hell happened? Ghost's breathing was weak and raspy. He would not be waking up anytime soon to explain things to him. Okay, focus. He needed medical attention. He doubted a regular hospital was a good idea. No one who frequented the bar, aside from underground heroes, were fans of things like hospitals and police. Ghost was likely one of them. But this wasn't the first person he'd needed to bring to a discreet doctor. There were underground clinics all over the city if you knew where to look. He gathered Ghost in his arms and headed for the closest one. He stirred at the jostling, coughing, and more blood dotted his chin. "Hey, I need you to tell me what happened," Shota said. "Racer," he breathed out. "Yeah, Eraserhead," he confirmed. "What happened?" "Gas," he murmured, eyes shutting again as he went still. That was enough for now. That would help the doctors treat him. The full story could come later, when his words didn't sound like garbled rocks. He kept an eye on him as he ran, watching to make sure he didn't stop breathing altogether. It wasn't until he reached a clinic and placed him on a bed, stepping back as nurses rushed him, that he realized how young he was. He didn't look any older than his students. Then, Shota was pushed out of the room to give the medical staff room to work. He only debated with himself for a few minutes before settling in the lobby and texting his husband. Now that he knew how young Ghost was, he'd never be able to relax until he knew he was okay. Did he have someone taking care of him? Someone that would worry when he didn't come home tonight? Not that he could do anything about it exactly, but he was worried the answer to both of those questions was no. He deserved to have someone care that he was okay, and if that someone had to be him, then so be it. Besides, maybe now that he'd saved his life, he could find out what he knew about the Nomu. About 2 hours later, the doctor came out to see him. "You brought the boy in with all the knives?" "Yes," he said. "Is he going to be okay?" The doctor heaved a long breath. "I won't lie, it's not good. We've done all we can, but whatever gas he breathed in was meant to kill instantly. It caused a lot of damage to his throat and lungs." "But he will live," he clarified. "I don't want to make promises. We've got him on medicated oxygen to see if that helps, but we only have the one tank. Once he runs through that, unless he goes to a clinic with more resources, there's a chance all that damage will reopen." Shota frowned. That was the drawback of underground clinics. This one was actually legal, taking normal people all the time and running insurance, all that good stuff. But they also accepted the no-questions patients, pulling some probably not-so-legal strings to get away with it. That meant they didn't necessarily have all the treatments needed for rarer injuries and diseases. "Is he awake?" Shota asked. He didn't want to take him to a regular hospital without discussing it with him, in case he was trying to hide from anyone, and he'd only bother Recovery Girl as a last resort. Once Recovery Girl was involved, it was only a matter of time before Nezu found out, and that was a can of worms best left unopened. "Not yet, but he probably will be soon if you'd like to wait with him." "Please," he said, and followed the man back to the room they'd set him up in. He was propped up on pillows to ease his breathing, and an oxygen mask covered the lower half of his face. Ideally, we'd transfer him to a larger hospital, the doctor said. Without proper medicine or healing quirks, he's looking at permanent damage if he lives through the day. If. There might not be a choice in getting Recovery Girl involved. I'll keep that in mind, he said, crossing the room to the opposite wall. There weren't any windows, and it was too small to bring a chair in, so he made himself comfortable on the floor while he waited, texting an update to Hisashi. With a snort, he spotted a basket full of ghost knives under the bed. It must have made the nurses and doctor uncomfortable while they worked on him. There were a truly impressive number of knives. Did he actually need all of them? Was it a comfort thing? Intimidation? He had so many questions. Ghost woke up a little before dawn. Shota had dozed on and off while he waited. There wasn't much else to do, and going to teach later was going to suck, but he'd done it before. He knew when and how to sneak in some power naps to get him through the day. He happened to be dozing when Ghost first woke up, otherwise his sudden jackknife and subsequent coughing fit wouldn't have caught him so off guard. Shota jumped to his feet and caught Ghost's hands when he scrabbled at the oxygen mask. It's all right, take it easy. You need that to breathe, calm down, he said. It wasn't his best comforting voice, but it got the point across. Ghost regulated his breathing and pushed him away, one shaky hand still clutching at the oxygen mask, but he didn't remove it. He glared up at him. You've only been out for a few hours, he told him, crossing his arms and stepping back to lean against the wall again. But that gas did a number on your throat, so you're stuck with that oxygen tank for now. His free hand clenched the sheet. Pulling out his phone, Shota opened the Notes app and held it out for him. Can you tell me what happened? Where did you find that gas? He took the phone, but did not explain anything. Where am I? Shota frowned at the screen. Underground clinic. His shoulders dropped a smidge, but he was by no means relaxed. When can I leave? The doctor will explain it when he comes in, but he actually wants you transferred to a standard hospital. That tank you're on will run out before you're healed. You'll end up in the exact same position before long. Grimacing, he idly tapped the sides of the phone before typing something else out. I can't stay. I have to take care of someone. He was taking care of someone. What about your parents or any other guardians? He rolled his eyes. Not in the picture, and I don't want any. Can I leave? Well, Shota's concern just skyrocketed to levels he'd be forced to act on. Damn it. Afraid not. If you tell me where to find... He shook his head before he even finished and typed out. Absolutely not. Yeah, he hadn't really expected that to get him anywhere. Ghost was not the type to give up secrets easily. I have to leave. Now. He waved the phone in front of his face to emphasize his point, and it took Shota a few seconds to read it. What part of you will die if you do that do you not get? He demanded. Frowning, he pointed at an earlier line. I have to take care of someone. That did complicate things immensely, he'd admit. If this person was a semi-competent adult, Ghost probably wouldn't be so worried. That meant it could be some elderly grandparent who couldn't move very well, or a little kid who shouldn't be left alone for long. Is there someone you feel comfortable calling to check in on them? He asked. Ghost shook his head, which wasn't surprising, only disappointing. You don't have a lot of options here, he said. You physically cannot leave this bed for a few hours minimum, and it's not recommended you leave even then. His glare turned mutinous. I will vanish if I have to. Do you want to die? Because all you'll accomplish is killing yourself. If he truly wanted to use his quirk to escape, there wouldn't be much Shota could do to stop him. Even if he activated Erasure, he would have to blink eventually, and Ghost only needed a second to disappear. And if he tried that right now, Shota would never see him again. Not until someone found his corpse in a gutter somewhere. From the way Ghost gripped the phone, fury in his eyes, he knew it too. Look, you know I'm discreet. You give me an address, no one will ever learn about it. He shook his head again, but the fury died down in his eyes and he typed away on the phone. I'm not just protecting myself. She doesn't trust other people. If a stranger shows up without me, she'll freak out, especially since I didn't come home. There was no end to how complex this problem could get, was there? And I'm guessing she has a knife, too. Ghost rolled his eyes and didn't bother to type out an answer. Great. Just great. He rubbed his forehead, cursing the problem and Ghost's stubbornness while he tried to come up with a solution. In the meantime, Ghost eyed the medicated oxygen tank currently keeping him alive and nodded to himself. Whatever you're planning, it's a terrible plan and it won't work. He typed one-handed. The tank is movable. I'll just bring it with me. Shota raised a brow, unimpressed. You're going to drag that heavy tank with you across the city. He gave a thumbs up and threw the covers off. Ah, hell. Why did he always find the stubborn teenagers? He rounded the bed to the tank and knocked Ghost's hands away. And what are you going to do if the person who attacked you comes after you again? Going to swing the tank at him? He blinked, mouthed some of the words, and then shook his head and typed. I wasn't attacked. I set off a booby trap. The guy who said it will have no idea it was me or that I survived. A booby trap. Pedophile kept pictures of his victims in a safe in his office, rigged it to kill anyone who opened it, and took the pictures out without disarming the trap. All right. That was concerning on a number of levels, but at least there was no immediate threat. We'll come back to that later, then. I'm not letting you walk out of here alone in your condition. He frowned and typed something out. Shota covered the screen and looked directly in his eyes. This is not up for debate. Your choices are to stay here and tell me where to find whoever it is, or I escort you there. You're not going alone. It was incredibly risky to even escort him. Ghost could run off on him if he wasn't careful, and then they'd be right back to where they started. In fact, he probably would if he agreed. Ghost wasn't happy with the idea, but he also didn't want to spend all day arguing because he typed out a quick, fine, and got to his feet. Ah, shit. The doctor was going to murder Shota for kidnapping one of his patients. He'd bring him back. It would be fine. Ground rules, he said. No quirk. Stay within 3 feet of me. Knives stay holstered. Ghost immediately reached for one of his knives and then, when he couldn't find it, started patting himself down. They're under the bed. 10 knives, and a few minutes later, he guided Ghost out of the clinic. This early in the morning, it wasn't too busy, and the front desk people were so tired and busy with paperwork they didn't even look up as they left, which really wasn't good, and Shota will have words about that with them later because they should be keeping a better eye on their patients, but it worked in their favor, so he'd let it go. Hopefully, this would be a quick errand to retrieve whoever Ghost took care of, and they'd be back before anyone knew they were gone. The city was quiet, and they didn't see anyone as they walked the back streets to one of the shadier parts of town. Shota dragged the oxygen tank cart, keeping one hand on Ghost's shoulder to keep him from running off. He didn't trust that carrying the thing literally keeping him alive right now would be enough if he was determined to make a break for it. It wasn't like he would die immediately once his throat was exposed to general air again, but city air never claimed to be clean air, and it wouldn't take much for him to reopen his wounds he earned last night, and then he'd be coughing up blood again with no way to stop. The only question was how long it would take. So Shota kept a hand on his shoulder to keep him from vanishing, and it seemed to work, because after almost an hour of walking, he started climbing the stairs to an apartment complex, pulling keys out from a zippered pocket. They'd been lucky the whole way here, running into almost nobody. It was almost eerie the way that no one else seemed to be awake, but he was grateful they didn't have to explain the oxygen tank to nosy bystanders. Ghost gave him one last glare, a hand playing with a knife hilt as a silent threat, and then opened his door. The lights inside the apartment were all off. They stepped right into the living room, a tiny kitchen on their left, and a single door ahead of them that must be the bedroom. At the far end of the kitchen, he could make out another door and what looked like the bathroom. The bedroom door was closed, and Ghost walked over to it, rapping his knuckles on the door lightly. He pulled his mask down, too, which Shota would reprimand him for, but Ghost knew the risks. Shota wasn't going to waste his breath repeating himself. Harry, it's me. His voice was absolutely mangled, raspy and deep, like a 90-year-old chain smoker. But the door creaked open a few inches, and a tiny face peeked out. Izu? Ghost kneeled to be at eye level with the child. Sorry I'm late. Eri teared up and threw open the door, ready to fling herself into Ghost's arms, but then she saw Shota. It's okay, Ghost said, muffling some coughs into his shoulder. He's a friend. Get that mask back on, Shota ordered. Nodding, he did as told for once, and Eri's eyes went wide. What happened? Are you okay? The little girl couldn't be more than 5 or 6 years old, with long pale blonde hair and a single off-centered horn over her right eye. Ghost offered a thumbs up, and then looked to Shota to explain. He crouched beside her so his height wouldn't intimidate Eri more than she already was. My name is Eraserhead. I'm a pro hero. It's nice to meet you, Eri. She glanced at Ghost again, still unsure about this whole situation. That was fine. Your friend got hurt last night, and he needs to stay with some doctors to make him feel better for a while. He didn't want to leave you alone, so he asked if we could come get you. Eri teared up again. Doctors? Ghost swatted Shota's knee again and mimed texting. Shota passed over his phone again, and Ghost wrote a quick message. She doesn't view doctors as safe. Tell her these are secret heroes and that I'm not going to let anything happen to her. There was a lot to unpack in that message. Doesn't view doctors as safe. Secret heroes. Assurance of Eri's safety and not Ghost's own well-being. Just what the hell was the story between these two? They didn't look related. Eri was all fair features and pale hair, while Ghost was olive-skinned and dark green hair. Had Ghost found Eri on a job one day and taken her in? He could ask later. The priority now was getting both of them back to the clinic so Ghost could rest again. They're more like secret heroes, Shota said, tucking the phone away. Both of you will be perfectly safe there, and Ghost will be as good as new before you know it. Eri tilted her head and looked at Ghost. Ghost? Oh, right. She'd said something else when she opened the door. Izu, he corrected. A real name or a fake name. It didn't matter, he supposed. Ghost slipped the phone out of his hand to type something else. Tell Eri to grab our go bags. She knows where they are. Oh, Shota hated that very much. This was their own home, presumably an apartment Ghost paid rent for himself, and he had go bags. He felt the need to be ready to run from his own apartment at a moment's notice. Felt like he might not come back now because Shota had seen it. Leaving alone the entire fact he had an apartment at all, how would he manage that without an adult signing the lease? Not the current priority. Eri, can you grab your go bags? Shota asked. She straightened and nodded, running back into the bedroom. She dragged 2 backpacks with her. Should I get dressed? Ghost nodded, typing out something else that Shota read verbatim. Something comfortable, okay? It'll be a lot of sitting around. Can I bring my coloring books, then? If Eraserhead will carry them for you. Sure thing, kid. Eri retreated into the bedroom once more, shutting the door. Ghost moved to his couch and sank down on it, rubbing his throat with a grimace. It wasn't a bad apartment. They weren't in the safest neighborhood by any means, but he saw new locks on the doors and windows, and the place was decently clean. It smelled like cigarette smoke, but that could be because of other tenants in the building, or even previous tenants of this apartment. That smoke clung to carpets and walls like a leech, and it never came out. He still had concerns on how and why Ghost and Eri lived here alone, but the questions could wait. Eri came out 5 minutes later in pastel unicorn leggings, tiny kid-sized hiking boots, and an oversized long-sleeve shirt with some kids' cartoon on it. She had a 3rd bag with her, presumably with her crayons and coloring book. Ready to go? He asked. Eri glanced at Ghost and nodded. Ghost hefted himself off the couch, slinging the larger backpack over his shoulders and helping Eri fit the second one on her back, before picking the little girl up. You can't carry her the whole way back, Shota argued. That'll put too much strain on your lungs. He glared at him and tightened his grip around Eri. Not a battle worth fighting. He'd try again later. Shota carried Eri's coloring books and the oxygen tank again. There were more people out now, but most of them weren't paying attention to him, waiting for the bus or stopping to look at something on their phones. He did a double take at a jogger frozen mid-stride, both feet off the ground. What the? It's Izu's quirk, Eri explained. Is that right? He asked. Ghost did not look happy to have this information being so willfully shared, and lightly bopped his forehead against Aries. Shota sympathized. He hated when his friends discussed his quirk to strangers, too, no matter how trustworthy the stranger. So he didn't ask any more questions, but he did watch carefully for the rest of the walk. He couldn't be sure of the finer details, of course, but if he had to guess, he'd say Ghost's quirk was some kind of perception or time-stopping quirk. It either altered how fast they moved, making it seem like they were on a leisurely walk while blasting past everyone at the speed of light, or stopped time altogether for everyone else. It might be overly powerful, but he leaned towards the time-stopping theory. Even birds would be stopped mid-flight, and there was no reason for his quirk to affect them, unless it affected everything within a certain radius. This could still be a perception quirk, but if he could literally stop time, that would explain so much. It covered how he vanished without anyone seeing him, and how he kept himself off of security cameras. There would be nothing to record if the cameras were stuck in time. He'd be mad at him for breaking his first rule, if he wasn't so impressed at how well he hid it. True, part of it was because there was so little to effect at 7 in the morning, but he'd still pulled it off seamlessly. He wondered how far his range was and what the limitations were. Wondered why he ended up on the streets as a vigilante informer instead of in a hero school. About halfway back, Ghost started coughing again, and Shota had to carry Eri. By the time they reached the clinic, Ghost was starting to stumble, and he was on the verge of calling for a ride when they made it. The doctor was less than thrilled about Ghost's little walk, but Ghost showed absolutely no remorse and tried to argue against getting back in bed. "Young man, if I had my way, you'd be transferred to the general hospital," the doctor warned him. "As it is, I have no idea what you're going to do when that tank runs out in a few hours." He shrugged, which did not comfort anyone. The doctor sighed. "Nurses will be by to check on you later. Maybe you'll change your mind by then." They both knew it was unlikely, but what else was the doctor supposed to do? Shota checked the time. He'd be late to class if he didn't leave soon, but he loathed the idea of abandoning the kids. He couldn't get rid of the thought that they'd disappear into thin air if they left his sight, and 2 minors should not be left to their own devices. It wasn't right. Someone should be taking care of them, especially right now, when Ghost was injured. Besides, Ghost was still his only lead on the Nomu and the League of Villains. He couldn't afford to lose track of him. But he really did need to get going. Maybe he could solve all his problems at once. "I have a proposition for you," he said. Ghost eyed him, wary but listening. Eri sat on the bed with him, tucked under his arm. "I'm a teacher at UA," he said, "which also happens to be where Recovery Girl works. If you come with me, she could heal your injuries in a matter of minutes." Ghost raised a brow, still waiting. "All I ask in return is information on the Nomus." His face twisted into a scowl. "If you want to live out the week, your only options are Recovery Girl or a standard hospital. And you know a standard hospital won't release you without a parent or guardian. And there will be all kinds of investigations into you." He tapped a finger on the bed, then made grabby motions. Shota handed over his phone. "Am I supposed to believe UA will just let me go? Won't you investigate?" "We will," he admitted. "But we won't necessarily get child services involved unless we have to." He had to be careful what he promised here. Legally, their hands might be tied to an option Ghost didn't want. "I could vanish from the hospital, probably UA too." "You could," he agreed. If his quirk worked the way he thought it did, it wouldn't be a challenge. But UA will do their utmost to protect you and Eri. His arm tightened around the little girl. "I'll level with you," he said. "The heroes need every bit of info we can get on the League and the Nomus. So far, you're my only lead into either of them. These villains attacked my class and hurt my students, and I want to stop them before they do anything else. So please, come with me to Recovery Girl." Ghost heaved a big sigh, coughed, and agreed. Shota called for a ride to the school, bundling the kids up in the back seat while riding up front with his husband. "Do I get an explanation?" Hisashi asked, pulling out into traffic. "Not yet," Shota replied. He napped on the drive, and when they arrived, he escorted the kids to the infirmary. Recovery Girl had just walked in, and she narrowed her eyes at the trio. "Shota, it's awfully early for your emergencies," Recovery Girl said. He sighed. "Can you just heal him, and keep an eye on them for the day?" "You know I will. Let me put my things down, then we'll have a look." The examination took a few minutes, and then Recovery Girl kissed Ghost's cheeks. Exhaustion hit Ghost like a truck, and he swayed on the bed, turning betrayed eyes onto Shota before passing out. "That should do it," Recovery Girl said. "I'm going to keep him on the tank until he wakes up, just so we don't aggravate his freshly healed skin." "Thank you," Shota said. "I'll stop by during lunch. Eri, can you stay here and watch over Izu?" She had the most terrified but determined look on her face as she nodded. "Knew you could," he said. "I'll see you later." Then he was off to teach, or find coffee, one or the other. He came back to the infirmary at lunchtime as promised. Ghost was awake and glaring at anything and everything. An empty cafeteria tray sat on the stool beside the bed. Eri had climbed up with him and had her coloring books spread over their laps, crayons currently making stray marks on the pristine white sheets below them. "I take it you're feeling better if you can eat solid food," Shota opened with. Ghost twirled a knife around his fingers. "You could have warned me her quirk would knock me out." "Would it have mattered?" "Yes. You want to get dragged to some strange new place and knocked out for a few hours, where strangers you don't know could do anything to you?" It was a testament to the different worlds they lived in, that the thought of anything happening to him this morning beyond getting some rest had never even crossed Shota's mind. He doubted it crossed Recovery Girl's mind either. "You're in a school full of heroes. Nothing was going to happen." "You ever do that to me again, and you're going to lose a finger. Or maybe your tongue for lying." This wasn't just paranoia. The anxiety thrumming under his skin couldn't quite hide the fear in his eyes. This looked more like a lesson he'd learned the hard way. "I apologize for causing unneeded stress," Shota relented. "That wasn't my intention." "I shouldn't tell you a goddamn thing I know. Screw our bargain," he muttered. Eri snapped the crayon she was coloring with and let out a whimper. Ghost's expression changed on a dime, and he laid the knife beside him. "Hey, it's okay," he said. "You're safe, I promise. I'm mad at Eraserhead, but he's not going to hurt us." "Can we go home now?" Eri asked. "Soon," Ghost promised with a meaningful look at Shota. "Once I tell Eraserhead what he wants to know, we'll leave." Shota kept his face neutral. That wasn't strictly true. He couldn't let a minor go and just wander the streets, no matter how capable the minor in question was. "Stay here and color while we talk in the hall, okay?" Ghost said. Biting her lip, Eri nodded. Ghost slipped off the bed and stood up, wordlessly leading the way out into the hall. The door swung shut behind them, and Shota took up a casual position leaning against the wall. "You better pay attention, because I'm only explaining this once," Ghost said, voice low and slightly hostile. "And I'm not explaining how I know this, so don't ask." "That just makes me more curious." "Then get used to disappointment," he snarled. "The Nomu are genetic experiments to combine multiple quirks into one person. The process more or less kills the people involved, and most of them aren't capable of thought beyond following orders." Genetic experimentation shouldn't surprise and horrify Shota as much as it did, and he did desperately want to know how Ghost knew this, because he wanted to follow that same trail and prove him wrong. What a cruel fate for whatever poor bastards had been involved. "I don't know where the doctor's most recent lab is, but his old one was in Minami Ward. You can ask All Might what happened to it." Good. A trail to follow. Hopefully All Might would be more cooperative. "Is that enough?" Ghost asked. He thought over the info quickly. What else did he need to know before he likely vanished for another month or two? You mentioned a doctor. Can you tell me more about him? His glare darkened to something murderous. Bastard scum you should kill on sight. Well, there were some personal emotions involved with that, which only raised more questions. Gonna need a little more than that to go on. Only knew him as the doctor. Glasses, overweight, bald, bushy mustache. Any of those could have changed by now. And you knew him personally. He couldn't keep himself from asking. Does it matter? He retorted. He's a psychotic lowlife the world would be better off without. That sounded pretty personal to him, which implied a lot of horrible things he wasn't sure he was ready to know. But it absolutely mattered. If he knew this doctor, he might know how he worked. He could tell them where he was likely to set up a new lab. And then, depending on how personal their relationship had been, he'd need a few years of therapy. What kind of lab does he have? Is it hidden within a legal research lab or completely hidden? Completely hidden, he said. I don't know where, and the only reason I would look for it is to set it on fire, preferably with him still inside. Many years of therapy. I've held up my end of the deal, Ghost said, moving back toward the infirmary doors. We're done here. Hold on. Shota stepped into his path. A knife was at his chest. Eraser, I swear to God, if you don't let me and Eri leave, Present Mike is going to be short one husband. Shota pressed his lips together. This kid was good. Threats of bodily harm to himself wouldn't necessarily faze Shota, but threatening to make his husband sad, they couldn't have that. Besides, the kid was on the cameras now. Shota could sick Nezu on him any time he wanted and probably find out where Ghost had come from. That didn't mean he'd give up without a fight. You don't have to leave. You're welcome to stay on campus as long as you want. Not a chance, Ghost spat. Why not? Because I don't need to be indebted to you. Eri and I are fine on our own. Now step aside. Shota was not going to win this fight, not today. So, even though it pained him, he took a step to the side and let Ghost walk past him into the infirmary. It was better to let the kid go and hope he'd earned enough trust to see him again. Eri perked up immediately, gaze bouncing between Ghost and Shota. Ready to go? Ghost asked, plastering a fake smile on his face. Nodding, Eri started packing up her crayons and coloring books. Shota took this chance to grab some scrap paper from Recovery Girl's desk and scribbled out his phone number. He didn't know if Ghost even had a phone, but he had to do something. Here, take this. Ghost took the paper and frowned. If you're ever in trouble, or need a place to sleep for the night, call me. No strings attached. Yeah, whatever, Ghost said. Despite his attitude about it, though, he pocketed the paper. Shota considered that a win. I'll walk you to the gate. We can find it ourselves. It's locked, to keep the media out. You need an ID to unlock it. Shota raised a hand to stop Ghost's protests. Yes, I know. You can probably get through it anyway, but please save me the headache of dealing with a security breach. Ghost smirked and finally acquiesced. He helped Eri into her backpack, and then hefted his own pack and her coloring bag. Eri held onto his hand and walked beside him into the hall. So, Shota started, glancing down at the kids. Am I allowed to ask about Eri? Nope, Ghost said. And if anyone asks you about her, deny everything. That's not concerning at all, Shota stated. Don't worry about it, Ghost said. Shota sighed. Did the kid really think he wouldn't worry? Wondering if these two were all right was going to keep him up at night. What if Ghost set off another trap? If anything happened to him, who would look after Eri? I meant it, about using my phone number, Shota said. Doesn't matter what you need, all right? I'll help however I can. Ghost hummed, clearly unconvinced, but didn't fight it. If he ever actually used the number Shota gave him, Shota would move mountains to get to him. Well, if you won't tell me anything about yourself, give me the name of this pedophile you went after last night. Oh, his name is Monty Soma. Shota committed it to memory. I'll make sure he's put behind bars. Guess I'm not getting paid for that, client, Ghost muttered. Is you? Eri asked. What's a ped... Pedophile, Ghost repeated. It's someone who hurts kids a certain way. Oh, she said. Was Chisaki one? Shota tried not to visibly perk up at the mention of the name. He didn't recognize it, but he could look into it anyway. It might give him some insights into these kids. No, what he did wasn't what pedophiles do, Ghost said. But both him and pedophiles deserve a special place in hell for hurting kids. So, Chisaki was not a good guy. Shota filed that information away. They were at the gate sooner than he wanted to be, and he reluctantly scanned his card to let them out. Take care of yourselves. We will, and thanks, I guess, for saving me. It's what I do, Shota said. Call me if you ever need saving again. Ghost politely smiled and nodded, and then he and Eri waved as they walked away. Between one blink and the next, both of them were gone. On a whim, Shota checked the time on his phone. It was about 10 minutes later than he thought it was, which could be his own miscalculation. Or it could be the result of Ghost's quirk. Something to keep in the back of his mind, Shota decided, walking back up to the school. He hoped that hadn't been the last time he'd see those kids. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 1 of Always Chasing After Something. Chapter 2 will be up next. I hope you all enjoy this fic. I think it's a really powerful one. The way the author writes this fic, the characterization of Izuku in this one, and the way that Aizawa is written here as well, I think is really great. So drop your thoughts, comments, reactions below. And if you like the fic, feel free to slide over to AO3 too. Leave those comments, kudos, support to the original author. I'm sure it's always appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.